So I've been recently watching Asian horror films, as I mentioned in a previous video, and one of the films that I watched recently, which just really struck me and has had a real big effect on me, was a film from 1964 called Kwaidan. Now, Kwaidan is directed by a guy called Misaki Kobayashi, and the reason I'm interested in it is it's an anthology horror film, and people always rave about it, that it being sort of one of the best. So, being a massive anthology horror fan, it was a film I always wanted to get around to actually watch, so I have. And it is just incredible. Kobayashi, the director, was a painter, and the visuals of this film just, he composes his shots like a painter would in the use of colour. And in fact, I'd go as far as to say I think it's one of the most beautifully shot films I've ever seen. It's just so striking. Anyway, so there are 4 stories in it, much like other anthology horror films, but there's no real wraparound story. The only thing that connects all of them is that each of the stories have supposedly been developed. I don't know the truth of it, but supposedly come from like really old Japanese mythology. There is a narrator who narrates each story, but you only hear him. He bookends the stories, and you never see him. Anyway, so the first story is one called, I think it's called Black Hair, and it's a story about a man that leaves his wife, who's an incredibly devoted woman, loving, caring, everything you would want in a wife, and he leaves her because he's fed up living in poverty, and he goes and he divorces her. He marries another woman who has a position of power, and he gets a position of wealth through that. And he over the years he through getting a bit wiser, he realizes that he would trade it all in for his first wife. So because his new wife is like quite callous, and she's not particularly nice anyway, so he leaves his new wife and goes off, this is years later, searching for his first wife again, and he finds her, and there's something very eerie about it. So I don't want to ruin it for you, but the ending is really pretty creepy. And I have heard there's 2 versions of Kwaidan, and the version I watched, I think it was slightly cut. That story was slightly cut, because I've heard the story has a slightly different ending to the one that I saw. So I need to check that out, but it's a wonderful, wonderful story. Anyways, the second story is called, I think it's The Snow Woman or Women of the Snow, something like that. I'm sorry if I don't get the names of the stories completely correct. And it's about 2 woodcutters, and they are out sort of gathering wood in a forest, and a snowstorm hits, and they have to then go. They manage to find shelter in a hut that's in the middle of the forest, and while they're sort of waiting for the storm to pass, this woman who is all dressed in white and appears to be like some sort of elemental creature or a ghost, comes into the hut, and the older man of the 2 she kills. And as she goes to kill the younger man, she decides that tells him, because he's young and also because she finds him handsome, she says, I'm going to let you live, but on one condition, and that condition is that you never tell anybody what happened. And she then leaves, and it's a story about whether he tells or not, and it again is quite creepy. The third story is called Hoichi the Earless, and it starts off with this epic battle. It's like incredible. It's really awesome, and you see this battle, and it's set hundreds and hundreds of years previous to when when the story takes place. And these stories all take place like a couple hundred years before, you know, 1964. You know, when the film was made. Anyway, so the Hoichi the Earless is a. It starts off with this battle and it shows you this army getting defeated at sea and they all die, and then it cuts to hundreds of years later where this man lives at this temple with these priests and he's blind but he's a wonderful musician, and late at night the ghosts of that army come to find him and ask him to play for their emperor who's or the leader, clan leader, who's obviously a ghost as well. Because the man's blind, he can't tell that there's anything weird. He thinks that he's getting a great honour put upon him, so he starts going every night, and then the priests that he lives with start getting suspicious because every time Hoichi goes to play for these spirits, he's losing a bit of himself. It's as if he's slowly dying, and the priests decide to intervene and try to stop the spirits from taking him away, and that's basically the story. The last story, which I think is called, is it In a Cup of Tea or In a Teacup? One or the other. It's a really peculiar story actually. It's really interesting. Starts off with a writer who's writing a story, and you hear the narrator of the whole film saying that, you know, for whatever reason this story was never finished. And we then see what the writer's writing. We see he has this sort of fantasy of himself as a sort of samurai who tries to take a cup of water, tries to take a drink. Every time he looks in the drink, he sees a man's face, and no matter where he goes, in the reflection there's a man's face in the cup. And eventually, because he's thirsty, he drinks it, and it turns out that he's swallowed part of this ghost's soul, and the ghost then comes for it. And it's got a really interesting ending because the story's not finished. The story then, the film almost guesses at what happened, and you get a wonderful. They're really talking about the audience, I think, and rather than the actual writer. But watch it. I don't want to ruin it for you. So anyway, on the whole, the film is just incredible. It's, let's say, one of the visually most striking films that I've seen in a long time, and it's haunting. Now the thing is, if you're a big horror fan, this is a horror film, right? I've no doubts about that, but it's closer to like a pure art form of cinema rather than, you know, it's not scary. There are some eerie moments in it, there are creepy moments in it, and the stories are all really interesting, but it's not going to terrify you. It's just it's hypnotic viewing basically. So if you're looking for that sort of thing, that's what you like, and you don't like basically something that's maybe a bit more ponderous and slower but takes its time, and proper ghost stories, then, you know, if you don't like that, then avoid this. But if you do like that, definitely watch it. It's really interesting. One thing I will say is there are huge parts of the film where there's like very little or no dialogue, and the soundscape is incredibly interesting. There's times, like the battle scene that I talked about, you never hear the sound of the armies fighting. It's just purely a soundscape that they build up, which is sort of ethereal and creepy. But anyway, it's an incredible film. You've got to watch it. Honestly, it's wonderful. And yes, it is subtitled, but please, if you always get put off because you think, oh, I can't watch a subtitled film, trust me, after a couple of minutes of watching a subtitled film, you forget that that's what you're watching. Really wonderful. So check it out.